So here is my response to the 2 case studies for content reading. Looking at David's case study about some of his challenges with reading and transitioning into an English-speaking classroom, some of my initial thoughts were I was kind of taken back by that he had not had any Spanish still included in his classroom. Something that we talked about in class was it can be good to have to still include his native language in the classroom, whether with labeling things or even allowing him to sometimes answer in Spanish or explain his thoughts in Spanish. A lot of the articles that I looked at or that we talked about in class talked about having the student master their first language through reading and writing and speaking can actually support their literacy skills in English. So I thought it was interesting that hadn't been done for David and maybe something that the teachers would want to consider. It looks like his biggest issue is with fluency. So I have some ideas on how you could support fluency, but his DIBELS also reflects that he has some issues with vocab and comprehension. So it's not just limited to fluency troubles. I did want to address some ways that maybe David could be helped with his fluency. I was looking at the WIDA examples and the can-do strategies, and it looks like David is probably at a level where he can do basic descriptions of the text that he's reading and show some comprehension about the text that he's engaging in. But I think, according to the WIDA examples for 3rd grade, David could also benefit from talking more about the story, more specifically about the details, and even using sentence structures and frames to help give him support. We had watched a video in class about using sentence frames for ELL students. This can be a really good tool to help them with fluency, but also to build confidence. Just overall, the classroom should be a place that helps all students take risks, and these sentence frames could be a really good way to help David grow with his fluency and take more risks. Another strategy for helping David with his fluency skills would be giving him different contexts for conversation. So maybe allowing him to read in different size groups, maybe in smaller groups or one-on-one or with maybe 2 other students. But we've talked about in class that some of the ways you can help support ELL students is having them work in groups. This can also help build their confidence and just give them more time and more strategies for practicing fluency and practicing their language skills. There are other things that you can do to help David with vocabulary and some of the other things that he was struggling with. Underneath the WIDA category, once again for 3rd grade, they suggested that maybe it would be a good idea to have the students highlight text and find main ideas to help build that comprehension and to get them more involved in the text. Something else for the general classroom that could be supportive to David that I would suggest is using multiple modes of instruction, whether that be through visuals can be really helpful for ELL students to help them connect what you're saying and what it means through pictures, whether he could have a little chart at his desk with pictures, or things could again be labeled in the classroom. Routines could have pictures that go with them, so that way the student is able to follow along more easily. Another thing that we talked about in class, and it's been referenced in several articles, is writing out steps for students along with those pictures. So that way students are again getting a visual and they're getting the language all connected. And then teachers also need to be aware of their own pacing in their language. I think teachers have a tendency to go quickly. Just being mindful of slowing down for ELL students can be a huge support, so that way they have time to understand what you're saying and conjugating those verbs or whatever you're saying inside of their head, so that way they can keep going. And then another thing that we've talked about in class is being aware of culturally unique vocabulary and knowing that sometimes English can be very lots of times actually, can be very tricky, and our words such as, different idioms and whatnot can mean something completely different. Or when it comes to like tossing a pizza or something, that language you're going to need to have provide context for that language, and maybe through a video or through a picture show ELL students what you're meaning when you say something like that. And the classroom, once again, just needs to be a place of continual support. These are just small examples of how you can help your student be more confident and give them tools for understanding. Looking at the second case study, there were several things that I thought this teacher might want to consider about their practice. One of the first things that I thought about is maybe they're lacking somewhat student-centered learning activities. It looks like they could benefit from increasing hands-on activities. It also looks like they could stretch their types of assessment that they do. It looks like the teacher is somewhat limited in the types of assessment that he or she does. And then also maybe consider increasing and differentiating the resources that they're using. So some ways that this teacher could make the learning more student-centered is having group learning times. It looks like it's pretty limited with maybe just doing lecture style, but we know that students benefit from having times of discussion, maybe having some shared reading experiences where they're able to talk about the text that they're engaging in before, during, and after they're engaged in the text. Anticipation guides can be really helpful for getting the student thinking about the learning that they're going to be doing or what they're going to be reading. They can talk about the text, what they are thinking the text is going to be about, and actually what it is about. These are all ways that you can bring the learning back to the student. Something else that this teacher might want to consider is having more times of brainstorming all together, talking about what they already know. If you have some idea of students' prior knowledge, you can know where to take the learning. And then also building off students' interest. So choosing text that you know that the students are going to be interested in, or choosing methods of teaching, I guess, that will be centered around the student. Another thing that this teacher could do is allow for freedom of choice when it comes to whatever the students are going to be reading. Students tend to be a lot more engaged if you give them a choice when it comes to maybe picking the text that they'd like to read, or even choosing who they would like to work with. These sorts of things can help liven up the classroom and bring it back to the student. I mentioned previously that I think it would be helpful to increase hands-on learning activities. Creativity in any classroom, I think, is so important to foster creativity. This teacher could allow the students to respond, maybe not just in exit slips, but through drawing, maybe presenting their ideas through like a reader's theater of sorts, just allowing them to do presentations where maybe they make some sort of like web page or a bulletin board or a poster, just ways that they're able to show their learning in different methods or respond in different ways. Graphic organizers can also be very helpful for showing students how to put their ideas onto paper and sort of map out the ideas that they're having. So this way they're thinking more actively and engaging more fully into what you're teaching. And allowing for different methods also can help meet the needs of diversity in the classroom. Students are not going to think in the same way, so giving them different modes of responding can be very helpful. And also providing engaging materials such as post-it notes, highlighters, markers, and pointers. Sometimes students can go crazy with the post-it notes and the highlighters, but this isn't all bad. You can show them how to use the highlighters and these other tools to mark their ideas and present their ideas. I think this teacher could also benefit from thinking about their assessment. It looks like they have one large assessment, the standardized test or the test at the end of the unit. But I think there's other ongoing assessments that they could use that would be a little more informal but beneficial for seeing students learning along the way. They could do self-assessment journals where they're tracking their learning in maybe their own personal journals, and even in these journals or as a class you could set goals and talk about how you're going to meet those goals. You could talk about having students conferencing with you about their goals and seeing if they're meeting those, or maybe coming up with some strategies together for how to meet those challenges. Artwork could be a really great way to see students learning, another creative way to see how they're doing, having them present their ideas through art. Collecting these work samples, these ongoing assessments, can be really beneficial, and keeping them maybe in a portfolio for each student so that way you can see their learning over time. And then assessment can be very informal. We talked about in class maybe just having some hand signals or holding up like a different colored note card that you know whether students are, yeah, I'm feeling good about my learning, or can you slow down, or I don't get this at all. These can be helpful ways for just tracking students' learning along the way rather than finding out at the very end that they are really struggling. My final thought for this teacher would be to really consider using more resources than just the science textbook. Maybe considering different trade books where ideas or information is presented in story form. Quality trade books tend to have lots of different facts, but presented in a grade level appropriate way with pictures, just engaging sort of methods for getting students to learn. This teacher might also want to consider different online articles and books. Time for Kids has been one of my favorites, where it's at an age-appropriate level, but they're getting really good material about all different types of contents. This teacher might also want to consider virtual and interactive resources, such as the Google Treks could be really cool to have students go on different adventures. I just looked up different science labs online that you can have students go through, where you might not have all the materials in your classroom, but they could act like a scientist online by doing different virtual labs. And then just being aware that you can search for text by grade level and content areas, so don't feel limited just by if you've only been given one textbook. Online there are so many resources that you can find by grade level and specifically by content area. And then these are my references.